Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
I've got to identify this because you're right. You take first place, you win the whole thing. Maybe you win it 10 times over because you think maybe the next time will be better, right? At the end of the day, the fear is still there. You are still trying to protect yourself. You are still burning calories in the wrong direction. When you can identify that, you can then work to alleviate that suffering in your life, and you don't have to react anymore. And you'll know when you're not doing the right thing, right? Mm-hmm. You'll know what that fear actually feels like.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
I need you, brother. Please, Sensei, please.
Courage, Bob. Courage.
That's it.
Courage.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Hey, thank you, Sensei. Thank you, Sensei. Thank you.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
Adventure Enablers, the leader in adventure race tracking, timing, and race directing, brings you the 2026 Shenandoah Epic Adventure Race, April 11th to the 12th. Registration is now open for the 15th year of one of the East Coast's longest-running 24-hour adventure races. Trek, bike, paddle, and navigate through Virginia's stunning Shenandoah Valley and the rugged Massanutten Mountain Range. New for 2026, multiple transitions that'll keep you moving and strategizing for the full 24 hours. Whether you're an AR veteran or hungry for your first epic challenge, this is your rite of passage. Push limits, chase sunrises, write your story in the wild. Register now at adventureenablers.com. That's one word, adventureenablers.com. So recently, I was introduced to a new product, which is the Nuatak Carabiner water bottle. A family friend is part of the team putting it together, and he shared it with me, and I want to share it with you. So Nuatak it's a carabiner bottle. It has the carabiner built directly into the handle. Also, you can clip it to your pack, your bike, your harness, whatever you want to clip it to, and it will hold whatever's inside, cold for 40 hours and hot for 20. So long-lasting insulation. It's a nice thing to have in your pack, in your bin along the way. On top of that, Nuatak, is part of their social responsibility, gives back 5% of their profits go to protecting lands and lives impacted by climate change. So check it out at nuatak.com. That's nuataaq.com. If you use the code TheDarkZone, you can get a 10% discount and some free shipping. So take a look at this new bottle. Obviously, anything that we get from that code usage will be poured right back into the Dark Zone in supporting the podcast and all the sponsorship activities that we have around the sport. So once again, take a moment, check out nuatak.com. Take a look at that water bottle. If you like it, you want to order it, feel free to use that code, the Dark Zone. You get a discount there and some free shipping. And if you like the item and the product, let us know what you think about it. We always like your feedback. Thanks. The Dark Zone is happy to introduce our community to adventure wear. That's one word, adventure wear, W-A-R-E, and they can be found at adventurewear.shop. A company founded by adventure racers for adventure racers. They offer a whole variety of products to the community, and check them out this holiday season. Custom engraved coasters, solid wood magnets, metal hangers that show off every hard-earned finish. You can celebrate your accomplishments and get some great products. So head over to adventurewear.shop and see what they have there. Once again, they are adventure racers offering products for the community. So support them by checking them out. Once again, adventurewear.shop, and the link is in the show notes. All right, folks, here we go. Brian Gatens here from the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast, episode 148 of the Dark Zone. From time to time, we like to go out and bring in non-adventure racers to teach us, to talk out loud about their ideas. And Slade Combs has joined us today. Slade is an interesting guy, former advertising executive, now works with teams with people about identifying their fears and working through them and helping them be the best version of themselves. And Slade was an interesting listen, so I appreciate him coming on the show and explaining the way that he sees things and what he could offer to the adventure race community. Thanks for being here. Episode 148. Working on a special one for 150. Special to me, a person who I'm very close with, got me into adventure racing, will be the 150th guest. I always try to have somebody interested when we hit those big numbers. 50 was Nathan, 100 was Grant, and 150 will be Well, I guess you'll just find out. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being a listener. We're wrapping up 2025. This is our last episode of the year. More to follow in 2026, and we look forward to telling the world all about adventure racing and bringing your stories and your friends' stories and the race director stories and the volunteer stories and the adventure racing community stories to a larger community. We love the sport and we love being a supporter of it, and we cannot wait to see what 2026 brings. And remember, folks, as always, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking. Welcome back to another episode. When we bring people on for the Dark Zone, a lot of our content is adventure racing related, right? Racers, volunteers, race directors. And from time to time, we like to bring people on who are adventure race adjacent, right? Who might not necessarily be inside the community, but they have experience and expertise that we want to bring to the larger community. A really good example would be Dave Jackson when he did his caving episode, which I'll put in the show notes, where he discussed fear. And that was a really, really good episode. Well, Dave recommended today's guest to us. His name is Slade Combs. Slade and I had a conversation several months ago before I went to Canada, and it went fantastic. I wanted to get him on the show. So here we are now. So Slade Combs, welcome to the Dark Zone. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. This is incredible. This is actually, I'm really excited to be here because of what it is that I do for a living and what it is that adventure racing is all about. So technically, I'm a behavioral strategist, and I specialize in fear. So I've worked with Fortune 500 companies and $1 billion brands, a lot of nonprofit institutions. I've worked with world record holders and Olympic athletes and their coaches and even U.S. military. So my job is kind of the best way to explain it is, have you ever seen the movie Inception before? Have you seen that?
Sure.
Okay, yeah.
Christopher Nolan, the best.
Yeah, exactly, right?
DiCaprio. I know that very well. Of all time.
Yeah. So like Leonardo DiCaprio, so he plays this role of Dom Cobb as kind of like main guy, right? And in his job inside of Inception is he breaks into the subconscious of individuals, and then he goes inside there and he plants some sort of a core idea, right? And as he does that, the brain is defending itself and he's running away from all these people and all these catastrophes and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, when he's able to plant an idea, it kind of changes the reality for the person, changes everything, changes their behavior, right? Their worldview. So for me, as a behavioral strategist specializing in fear, oddly, it's somewhat similar, but instead of breaking into your subconscious to plant an idea, there's already an idea inside of your head, and my job is to break into your subconscious with you. We do it together, and we're looking for one specific idea. In fact, it's one fear, one specific unconscious fear that you have, and everybody has one, but all their fear, it's unique to each individual. And as we do that, the brain actually tries to defend itself as it's going about trying to keep this one fear safe. There's a really big reason why this one fear is unconscious, why it's hidden inside of your brain, and your brain wants to protect it. But once you can uncover what that one unconscious fear is, we call it your deepest and darkest unconscious fear, this is the thing that makes everything different. Life fundamentally changes, your perspective, your worldview, everything changes. But the crazy thing is this fear, a lot of people, when I start working with them, they're like, I think I know what I'm afraid of. They'll talk about like spiders and snakes, but this isn't what we're talking about. The fear that I identify with clients that I work on, it doesn't feel like fear at all. It feels like you're doing what's right to keep yourself safe, but the end result is suffering. So oddly, there's something that's sabotaging you, but it feels like conviction. It feels like you're doing the right thing, but the end result is your life keeps falling apart. So as a behavioral strategist, this is what I love to do is I sit down with people and I say, okay, whether it's a business or, individuals who are trying to do incredible, amazing, especially physical feats that have a lot to do with psychology, any of those kinds of things, is they're trying to go ahead and achieve some sort of amazing goal or try and, take on some sort of new task. There's this idea that there is something hidden inside of your brain that will be actively sabotaging you as you pursue those efforts. So let's dig that out. Let's find out exactly what that is so it doesn't stop you. And better than that, when we inverse that fear, we find something that's pretty magical, a new form of energy. So this is at the core of what it is that I do is finding an unconscious fear that most people don't even know exists.
You talk about the spiders and the bugs and all that before, right? Very often people will identify fear as a noun or as a verb, right? Fear of falling or fear of a spider, or fear of that. What you're saying is that the way that you conceptualize the conversation is that inside of everybody, there's this fear that they don't even realize is a fear. And then there's a whole slate of behaviors around it where they believe that the behavior is actually beneficial when it's not. Am I catching it correctly?
This is a really, really good way to put it. Yeah. So we have what I like to call like ancillary fears, or like these orbital fears. And if you could imagine this one specific fear is like a dark planet, and it actually has so much mass to it. It can hold other like satellite fears inside of its orbit. So yeah, so you end up with people who are like, oh, I'm afraid of flying, or I just don't like public speaking, but they don't realize that that's actually like an ancillary fear. Right. It's tied to a much greater fear. And the reason, or like the way I came about doing this, is the majority of my career was actually spent in advertising. I ran an advertising agency in New York City for 20 years. And what we do in advertising is we actually try and find this fear, and we want to weaponize it against the individual. So I don't know if you ever saw, there was a documentary called The Social Dilemma that came out, not too long ago. It was on Netflix. Mm-hmm. Inside of there, they kind of talked about this, digital persona of oneself. So in advertising, there's kind of two things that we look at. One thing is the demographic, right? How old are you? How much money do you make? Where do you live? Those kinds of things shift and change over time. But the far more important and far more powerful thing that we're looking for in advertising is the psychographic. What do you actually believe? What's going on inside of your head? That fundamentally doesn't change because it's tied to traumatic events that you experience in your childhood. And so what we're looking at is we're trying to figure out what is that one fear. What it comes down to, this digital persona of yourself, it creates one solidified fear. And that fear is based in negative emotion, because negative emotion, we can talk about the science behind this a little later, but like negative emotion is 5 times more powerful than positive emotion. Right. So which is
why bad news sells.
Yes, right. This is exactly why the algorithm is the way the algorithm is.
Right. Which is actually a larger, and I don't want to drag you too far off your topic, but I'll say for the conversation, that's why social media is so corrosive, because they've weaponized our proclivity for negative attention against us. And all they do is pump us full of bad news. And therefore we think the world is falling apart, when in reality, it's the perception that it is.
100%. So what we're trying to do in advertising, right? In my old career, I retired from that because I was like, I wanted to use these powers of evil for good. Mm-hmm. But the concept is, let's actually find out this one unconscious fear that you have that developed inside of your childhood. We're going to use AI and metadata. So like when you're scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or anything like that, and you slow down just a microsecond, right? And then keep speeding up, that's data. We're going to collect all that data. What are you looking at? What buttons are you pushing? What are you engaging with, right? What are you commenting on? Millions of points of data then start accumulating to create this digital persona, this digital avatar. Right. It's called machine learning, feature vector of what we're doing. But essentially what we're doing is we're creating a predictable archetype of your worst fear, your deepest and darkest fear. Right. And then we use that like a digital voodoo doll against you, because we know that this motivates you more than anything else in the world. And the best part about it is it's completely unconscious. You don't know exists. So you think you're making decisions, all the while we're pulling all the strings. Yeah. So this is the fear that we're talking about.
It's like the fish forgetting that it lives in water.
Yes.
Right? 'Cause it's always in the water. So we normalizes the experience. So in your work in advertising, your work in understanding people and what drives people, you clearly decided to move away from that field and you moved into this work that you're doing now. Mm-hmm. And when you mention the idea of having this fear inside of you, that to me feels kind of metaphorical. Not that it's not real, but it feels metaphorical. Can you walk us through an example of a person that you helped identify and unpack, and then what the impact on them was by doing that?
No, this is great. Because a lot of people will ask when I start working with them, it's like, what is this fear? Where does it actually come from? Is this like some sort of esoteric idea that we're talking, some philosophy or something like that? Or is there actually like real science to it? So this one specific fear that we're talking about, it develops in childhood. And so the way that this works is as we're growing up and as our brains are growing, right, we're kind of laying down all these different neural pathways. And the ones that get laid down early on in life tend to be a lot more hard-coded than the ones that we have later on inside of life. So as we're growing, what our brain is really looking at is experiencing all sorts of different things, right, when we're in our single digits. And as it's experiencing all these different kinds of, events that are going on, all this different kinds of stimulus, it's really looking for what is the most traumatic dynamic that I need to keep this individual safe from. So oddly, your fear develops because your brain is actually recording a relative fear, not objective fear, like relative trauma, as opposed to like objective trauma. So yeah, there might be kids, starving in a third world country somewhere, but if you're growing up in New Jersey, right, and as a kid, like you don't know that as a 5-year-old, as a 6-year-old. All your brain knows is this is the most traumatic dynamic that I have come across. And so I'm going to hard code that. And as it hard codes that, it hardwires two patterns. The two patterns are, what's the primary threat that's come up against me that I need to keep this individual safe from, I keep myself safe from. But it also hard codes a way to produce fast results. So when something bad happens to us at that level, we learn this motivates and moves us to action fast. We want to avoid that, right? But to flip that, we then can use that same kind of a fear. This is what I like to call weaponizing your fear, is we learn how to do that to others to produce those fast results. And this isn't a conscious thing. This is an unconscious thing. And this is where things become really dangerous, because on the one side, just having this fear, this primary threat, like advertising, businesses, all these different types of media, we can use that to control you, because we know if we poke you in this way, you will move in that direction to avoid it. But what people don't know is that they can then start dismantling their own lives when they unconsciously weaponize their own fear and hurt the people closest to them.
Well, sure. Well, the idea being that our behaviors are behaviors that look to be striking out at others are really self-preservation behaviors.
Yes.
Right. Like you're hurting me. Well, okay. Yes. My behaviors are hurting you, but my behaviors are actually designed. I'm in a perverse way. I'm protecting myself.
Yes.
And you are the collateral damage to that behavior.
Yes. And this is the problem, especially when you start thinking about stuff like high stakes team situations, adventure racing, right? Mm-hmm. You can have somebody, let's just say somebody grew up and they have their brain recorded being controlled. Maybe they had a really controlling parent, it could even be abusive, something like that, right? But you have a controlling dynamic inside of there. So right off the bat, what they're prone to do is they don't want to be controlled under any situation, right? They just have this knee-jerk reaction to I feel like people are controlling me. But then when they weaponize that, they can then become hyper-aware and they start trying to control everything and everyone around them as a mechanism to keep themselves safe, like you said. You take someone who might just have maybe a major theme in their fear. It could be neglect, right? They were neglected as a child. And because of that, you could then end up just saying hey, I'm on a team and we're doing this thing. And if I get mad or if I feel threatened in any way, I'm going to give you the silent treatment, right? So one person's going to control everybody and everything and get it in everyone's face. The other person's just going to be completely silent. And so the difficulty of this is your fear tends to be triggered in stressful situations. So when you talk about adventure racing, this is where I actually get really excited because of the potential of what, of the good stuff that we have. But also this is where things can start to break apart really, really fast. Like I said, I've worked with the military, a lot of really high performers. When people get into really stressful, especially physical and psychologically stressful situations, mm-hmm. their fear gets triggered fast. Mm-hmm. And without knowing it, they move into mental patterns that start to create chaos. They actually start to break them down and make things worse for them, make whatever they're doing far more difficult than it actually needs to be.
Well, what's interesting is that as we have this conversation, as you relate this back, your work into adventure racing, you mentioned the idea of those that may hyper control or those that go with neglect, the silent treatment. Mm-hmm. And in my unofficial capacity as an anthropologist of adventure racing, I will tell you that very often you see those two dynamics come out very often in teams. Those maladaptive behaviors manifest themselves in teams, which are then corrosive to the team dynamic. And on top of that, you also noted the idea of happening under stress. And then when you add in fatigue, hunger, fear, it's like a rocket ship and those things take off. And so the fascinating point is everything that you're talking about in your work without careful thought can manifest itself inside a team dynamic on an adventure race.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, I think really the difficult part about this too is nobody really knows that this exists, right? So the fear itself is actually hidden. It's actively being hidden by your brain because the concept behind the brain is you would have to expend so many calories. You would have to be so hypervigilant all the time to be continually scanning for this one fear that it would literally cause you to have chronic fatigue, chronic stress, chronic disease. It'd kill you fast, right? And for some so scary, you might just want to jump out of a window. So the idea is the brain says, I'll keep this locked away in the unconscious. And when you're triggered by it, I won't trigger you in a normal way. Usually when you're triggered by a fear, like spiders, right? It's here's the memory, right? The context as well as the emotion. You're really scared. Here's the jumpy kind of feeling, right? Mm-hmm. And then here's the context. Remember that last time where you saw a snake that just, slithered out, or you saw a spider that jumped on you, right? So those two things come. With this fear, you only get one. You only get the emotion. You don't get the context. Your unconscious holds on to that. So you're left having these really powerful negative emotions, whatever they are, stress, anxiety, depression. but you don't know where they come from because your brain is actively hiding it from you. So if you have an adventure team, right? One of the difficult parts of this is if nobody knows what their fear is, but they're acting out because they're being triggered by their fear, not knowing that they're doing this, because again, this fear doesn't feel like fear. It feels like conviction, feels like you're doing what's right. But in the end, it's suffering. You can end up with these crazy dynamics. Like there's three dynamics that I see a lot in my work. One dynamic is the boxing match dynamic, where you have somebody who'd be like if you have like a controlling person, right? And maybe they're teamed up with somebody who is a judgmental person, right? So they've both been hurt by a person like that. So the controlling person was hurt by a controlling person, but when they weaponize it, they become the controller, right?
Sure.
So you get a dynamic like that. This is the boxing match where it's like the controlling person's like, I'm taking charge because you always mess stuff up. And then the judgmental person's like, everything's always messed up because you always take charge. These guys are just going to box it out, right? Mm-hmm. They won't see that they're being triggered by their fear. They'll just assume it's the other person, it's this situation. So you get a lot of that with boxing matches, kind of a dynamic where people are fighting. Then there's like the intellectual chess match. This is like when you can actually identify these fears, right? And people, once they identify what their unconscious fears, when I take them through the exercise, it's like the lights go on. So like a chess match would be like a person who has a fear of like selfishness, right? A really selfish person raised them, but therefore they become really selfish themselves. And if you put that up with like a manipulative person, right? Then all of a sudden you have like the selfish person's just going to be like, I'm just going to take whatever I want. That's going to be like their de facto when they get triggered by their fear, right? And the manipulative person is like, I'm going to prevent you from taking what you want. And so since it's never like an out and out, it's like a chess match where you could actually be on the trail, be doing the thing, and you're actually silently sabotaging each other because you're both weaponizing each other's fear, right? And then you have something that really bad ones are when a person has the same fear as another person on their team. So just take two selfish people, right? On the one side, you end up with escalation. You'll just keep taking and the other person keeps taking, then you keep taking and more and more and more, and that ends up in escalation. Or you end up in like a stalemate where you try and act against your fear and you're like, okay, I'm not going to be selfish, I'm going to give. And that's when you probably see a lot of that when like the race is all done, you guys want to go have dinner. and then the selfish person's like, I'm going to be the better person. Where do you want to go to dinner? And then the other selfish person's like, I don't know. Where do you want to go to dinner? And then no one can ever decide where to go to dinner.
All right. And it just escalates from there. Meanwhile, the person who's judgmental is like, I'm just hungry, guys. Cut it out. I want to go eat.
Exactly. So the thing that's hard about that though is if you don't know what your fear is, this unconscious fear, and if your teammates don't know what their fears are, you can actually be attacking each other, not even knowing it, thinking that you're doing the right thing to move something forward. You're burning a bunch of calories that you don't need to be burning either. You're really taking a lot of your caloric intake and dedicating it to trying to use these maladaptive coping techniques. And it's not only toxic in a team, it's like you can take this home, and this is toxic in a marriage because your spouse has their fear too, and they don't know what it is either. And it can be toxic in raising children. Children, they have their own fears too. So not knowing what this fear is so difficult. But I mean, that's the biggest thing is like, if the suffering is so obvious, why is this fear so hard to detect? This is the question that I get a lot from people.
That was my I was going to make a comment to the idea that before we get into the idea of identifying the fear, the exercise you talked about, it's also worth pointing out too that there's also behavior by proxy, right? I worked with children for a very, very long time, and very often when a child was misbehaving, when we spoke about that child's behavior, it always came out that child A is acting this way because while he's acting angry, he's actually really sad, right? So the sadness is driving the anger because he can't process the sadness. He's going to lash out. There's that. And the second thing you talked about was that there's a really, really seductive jolt of adrenaline when you're in conflict. And so therefore they'll be acting out, they'll be misbehaving, they'll be really going at it with somebody else. And inside them, the cortisol and the adrenaline are pumping away, and it feels good because it gives you kind of that energy because now you're in battle. And that's why when you're fighting with somebody, you're so sure you're right. A half an hour later, you're kind of like, oh man, I screwed that up, because the adrenaline flows out of your system and you realize what a jerk you were. The idea of walking something off, those two things. That's
so true. Like that's what I say. And this is such a unique fear too, right? Spiders and snakes they're easier in comparison because that's the kind of thing where you're like, that's a spider, that's a snake. Right. I shouldn't probably be close to it, right? It's obvious and you know what exactly to do. This one, it feels so much like conviction. It feels so much like you're doing what's right, but the end result is suffering. And that's how you start to see its residue, where you start realizing, I've got a lot of chronic suffering in my life. I cause a lot of chronic suffering in other people's lives. But the problem with this is your brain really wants to keep this fear hidden. It wants to keep it safe. So even though we might have these chronic sufferings, right? We keep doing these maladaptive things. It still protects the fear in and of itself. So it tries to convince you that your chronic suffering actually has nothing to do with the original fear, the genesis of the.
It's always classic misdirection, right? It lies with the behavior of others, or it's due to this thing or to that thing, everything else but that. So let me ask you, and this may be a more complicated question you have a tough time answering inside of a podcast. Very often, these behaviors, right? These behaviors, they live for years under the surface. They mask as different things. The fear is not there. And people spend a lot of time and a lot of effort unraveling all of those childhood behaviors, the interactions, and then they bring that alive. But as I hear you talk about it, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you speak about it. It's relatively simple to identify this fear. Am I? But it sounds like it shouldn't be. But is it like, walk us through the idea of identifying the fear? How does that process work?
So this is the thing where this is where advertising becomes interesting, because I've worked with a lot of psychologists. They've wanted to go through the program, and like I remember one psychologist, as I was taking her through it, she goes, there's two things that I learned from this entire process. She goes, the one thing was the ability to extract this one fear is so quickly. It usually takes like months and months and months and months. And this is we're not here to diagnose PTSD and stuff like that, right? That's
that's an important thing to point out, right? This is as you talk about it, like there are, and I appreciate you saying that, right? Because I think we don't want to appear to oversimplify complex mental health challenges.
No,
and you're
not at all. Okay. Not at all. Yeah. So this isn't, if you need some real mental health, if you need to get your insurance, if you want to get a true diagnosis, go see the reputable professionals for that kind of stuff. This fear is different. It is a reflection of the worst traumatic childhood dynamic that you have. So this is also not going to be tracking things like, biological issues that you might have right inside of your family.
Right.
But that said, and when I was, chatting with this one psychologist, she said, what's interesting is you're able to identify this traumatic dynamic so quickly. And it usually takes me so much longer to identify this. You never have to actually talk about anything in my childhood. So we take you through this exercise. The exercise itself is only about 20 minutes long, right? And as we take you through the exercise, you don't even have to talk about your childhood. Essentially what we're doing is in advertising, how should I say this? Advertising is like psychology without a Hippocratic oath. It's like all they really care about in advertising is motivating and moving people, and they don't care how it's done, right? So when it comes down to it, in psychology, you really, really have to care about people's well-being. You have to care about making sure that everything is done, correctly and ethically. We don't have that in advertising. So what you end up with in advertising is a lot of ways to hijack a system. And so with this, what we do is we go inside of the brain, because the brain really wants to keep this thing safe. And inside of this activity that we do is we go inside of there and we put it through a visualization exercise. And inside that visualization exercise, we actually allow it to believe that it's going to keep itself safe, all the while divulging the dynamic that it wants to avoid more than anything else. It ends up being an archetype. So this archetype is a type of a person, right? This is the type that we're actually trying to extract. And as we extract that, we're then better able to identify this is the dynamic that when you're up against, it is more traumatic than anything else. You will run away from any great opportunity. If you want to succeed at something, it doesn't matter if you're up against this. Your brain will sabotage you to make you think that goal, that dream, that hope, that vision, it is not worth it. You need to run away because it just doesn't make any sense.
Because it's so powerful, right? The thing of it is so big to you that you'll make these massive behavior choices which run contrary to your well-being because you want to protect yourself against it.
Exactly. And so like in a real world situation, I call this the predictable path, right? Usually in life, when we talk about succeeding and success, there's the formula that we're given to produce that kind of success. It's supposed to be a predictable path towards success. And the idea behind that is trade internal suffering for external results. That's kind of the concept, right? If we want to succeed at something, go to school. I'm in elementary school, sit down, be quiet, don't move, and just listen, right? And then if you do whatever I tell you to do, like we're kids, we're not built to like stay still, right? But if you can put yourself through that suffering, then I'll give you this external result, which is like a grade, right? And then what does that give us? Well, later on, maybe some sort of a job that we want. And what will the job give us? Some sort of external result like money. And then what will that money give us? And on you go. So I work with people who have made, billions of dollars, and most people are trying to get to the point where the external results are so big. I've made so much money that I can finally do whatever I want to. Most people will never get there. Most people will never cash out, right?
Well,
so
it's never enough. It's never enough. And I call it the golden handcuffs. Right?
Yes.
In fact, you have to work so hard to maintain the living that you're a slave to the things you own. It's a classic line, right? The things you own end up owning you.
100%. And so for people who have been then successful, like quote unquote successful, right? They become a billionaire and they have all this money. They still suffer from this thing of like, what for? I think for a lot of people who have done, so adventure racing, I think is really unique because we're not talking about just one small little marathon. I mean, not to say that marathons are small and like a nothing, but it's like adventure racing is intense, right?
Well, in the context of all sports, we love our marathoners, a lot out there, one myself. A marathon is 26 miles in which you're pointing in what direction to go. Yeah. Right. Your job is to hold on for those hours. And the end line is the end line, whereas adventure racing is so much more complex and there's so much more to it that marathoning and adventure racing they live in the same family, but they're far different beings.
What we end up with is then instead of adventure racing, it just kind of it's like a self-selecting group of people who tend to be really, really good at the stuff, right? Physical stuff, psychological stuff. And so what you get at the end of this route of this predictable path is supposed to be the predictable path to success. But when we trade internal suffering for external results, it really ends up being a predictable path towards suffering. And so you can end up then at the top of the mountain, right? You can have the gold medal. I get this a lot when I work with like Olympic athletes and stuff, like world record holders. Once a person gets the gold medal or they get the world record, you see them quite quickly, for a lot of people, quit. Like we call it retiring, right? But the idea is like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. Like I thought everything would change. I thought life would be so different when I was number one. But once they get there, they realized, oh my gosh, how much suffering and sacrifice to get here. And now here doesn't feel like I thought it would. I don't even know what to do with the rest of my life. And so this is where we start to talk about the great thing about knowing what your fear is. Because on the one side, if you're just going to keep weaponizing your fear and accidentally leaning into your fear to try and produce results to become successful, that will over time end up in chronic burnout, chronic sickness, right? And you yourself, even if it gets you to the top, which actually it decreases your performance, it actually makes you perform worse when you're reacting out of fear. When you do that over time, then there will come the point where it's like, what is this all for? Like I remember when I was in high school, I was the fastest kid in the nation in the hurdles for a while, and I remember thinking, oh, life is going to change when I finally get there. And then I got there and I showed up to practice the next day and some kid was like, hey, you know that everybody's coming after you now, right? Right. And I was like, wait, what? I thought everybody would like me, but but you're telling me like I'm a target now, right? It's a different dynamic. It's very isolating. So the opposite of that then is saying, okay, if you can identify this one unconscious fear that you're running away from that makes you chronically sick, that actually makes you like underperform when you're doing your thing, but it makes you feel like you're performing well. When you inverse that, because your fear is a chemical trace, it's a neurological pathway. It's just been hit so many times when you were younger that now it's just really, really fast. But there isn't a chemical inverse to your fear. And the chemical inverse to your fear is actually what your brain wants more than anything else, even more than avoiding this fear that you have. And the inverse of that is scientifically, like technically speaking, a life's purpose. Every other purpose that you have in life is going to be somewhat temporary. Any kind of a role or a goal, like making first, getting the gold medal, right? Once you do that, it's over. It's like that's your life isn't over. But this neurological pathway, since it's tied to your fear, will never go away. So this one thing that your brain wants more than anything else is your life's purpose. And this is the dynamic then that you can leverage when you go and you actually perform. You can tap into your life's purpose as a form of direction and perpetual energy that never gives out. So while you're out there doing your thing, you can actually tap into the better part of your brain as opposed to the worst part of your brain.
Right. So what you're saying is that when someone acts through fear, right? And that's waiting for them. That serves as a motivator for them to do things, complete things, finish things. But the problem is it's a catch-22, because when you're driven by the fear and you're driven by the need to prove yourself, you're driven by the need to push through that childhood trauma, you win the gold medal, you're on top of the podium, you climb the mountain, and you get on the other side of that and you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, like, now that I've achieved this thing, I'm no fundamentally different than I was before. There was no, golden ring at the end. But what you're saying is that by identifying that fear, you then become transcendent. That fear no longer drives you. So then when you go and you do those things, you don't have that big letdown on the other side of it, because you're no longer driven by the thing that you were scared of.
Oh, 100%, right? 100%. So this is brilliant, because, like, going back to Leonardo DiCaprio in Inception, right? I guess you could say, instead of Inception, what we end up doing is inversion. So you jump inside of your brain and you say, I've got to identify this fear, because you're right. You take first place, you win the whole thing. Maybe you win it 10 times over because you think maybe the next time will be better, right? At the end of the day, the fear is still there. You are still trying to protect yourself. You are still burning calories in the wrong direction. When you can identify that, you can then work to alleviate that suffering in your life, and you don't have to react anymore, and you'll know when you're not doing the right thing, right? You'll know what that fear actually feels like. But when you inverse that fear, that inverse actually is that chemical trace, and your brain will say, this is what I want, and if you do this, if you activate this in your life, I will give you a perpetual source of energy, and you will have a very specific direction. This is not an esoteric idea of what people usually think purpose is. So usually when you think about purpose, like, it's probably easier to describe what a neurological life's purpose is if you describe what it isn't first. So, like, this neurological life's purpose, the inverse of your worst fear, right? It's not a temporary purpose, so it can't be a role or a goal. Technically speaking, a role or a goal cannot be a life's purpose, because once you accomplish a role or a goal, it's over, but you're not dead. So therefore, you still have to say, like, is there any purpose?
Well, that's when you stop being the thing, right? If you're an Olympic athlete, I think Michael Phelps is a really good example of this, right? Yeah, Michael Phelps is talking about his challenges, and he climbed to the top of the mountain, and he realized that when his role, his public facing perception as being Michael Phelps, when that all went away, he was very empty inside.
Oh, huge. Yeah. I mean, it can cause literally like midlife crises. For some people, it can become very, very dangerous. What is my purpose even living anymore? Like, what am I doing here now that I'm not the thing, or that I found out that the thing isn't that great of a thing, right? Yeah. On the one side, your life's purpose, it's not a role or a goal. And on the other side, it's not a why. A why being like a conscious reason for doing something. So you can have a lot of whys in life. There's a lot of reasons for doing something. Mm-hmm. But this is deeper than all of those. This is like the because behind all of your whys. So instead, your life's purpose, it's two things. Because it's neurologically based, right? It is lifelong. So your brain wants this as a default because it's hardwired inside of your brain. And then two, it's a unique fingerprint. Your life's purpose is unique to you, and mine is unique to me, and ours are not the same. Mm-hmm. They're going to be different. So in that purpose, it's going to give us these two things. It's going to give us a very specific direction. This is the type of person who I want to be. This is what I want to do with my time. And it's as we move in that direction, our brain then gives us a perpetual source of energy. It gives us so many good chemicals because this is the key. This is the chemical key that ends the negative story that it wants, right? And with that, you end up with two outcomes then. And the one outcome, you have the alleviation of the greatest suffering that you've suffered from. Like, you're no longer running away from this dynamic or this thing that you don't want in your life. And on the other side, you actually have the identification and fulfillment of your true potential. So instead of thinking like I was born to, take number one, it's like, no, I was actually born to be this kind of a person, and that's all I want to do with my time. And the best part is then you can take that and say, how do I use this as a tool to apply it to something like adventure racing? How can I actually use my purpose and the chemicals that it will give me to enhance my performance? And that's where it gets really exciting.
So clearly what you're saying there is that when you go through the process, you transcend it, you have a new way of seeing things. They go through the 20 minutes with you, they identify the greatest fear. We've seen time and time again in human nature that self-knowledge about a behavior that is maladaptive is not really enough to always conquer that behavior.
No.
Right. So I want to make certain we're being clear with the listener, the idea that, like, I'm sure there are people who go through the process, identify the fear, and don't do a blessed thing. Like they're like, thanks, Slade, got it, check. Like because what pops in my head is, and I'm familiar with therapeutic practices. I'm familiar with that, and I've spoken about how I've availed myself of mental health professionals to manage some recent physical trauma that I've gone through. Yeah. Is that the idea of titration? Right. That when you walk somebody through a traumatic event that might be hardwired for decades in their life, you can't just drop it on them. Right. Yeah. You can't just, but correct. Instead you have to go through a process where you slowly, usually through talk therapy, working with a professional, you slowly peel back the layers of that onion that cause you the challenges, that cause you the mental health issues, and do all of that. Your conversation runs kind of contrary to the idea of titration. The idea that relatively quickly you could identify that fear and then begin to work on it. How do you square those two thoughts?
This is great. I love that you bring that up, because you're right. When it comes down to it, what we're really doing is we're doing some neurological reconditioning. So when people work with me, it's actually over a period of 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. And we meet together once a week, roughly for about 2 hours. Mm-hmm. We'll meet together. And initially, the whole idea is we're going to do some assessments, and we're going to find out, where is it that you're at, and what do you think you want in life, and where are you kind of like naturally gravitating towards? I want to become this. I want to do this, right? A bit of like a vision exercise kind of a thing. And then we take them through the exercise of identifying what their fear is, and then inversing that, finding out what their purpose is, and then breaking that down into like these things we call core motivators. And then over the subsequent weeks, we actually have a strategy that they can start applying it in their life, to their personal life, to their business, but especially to whatever it is that they're focused on most. So for this, we actually, so if you go to sladecombs.com, the website, we put together a very special session just for adventure racers that we wanted to start at the beginning of the year. So January, right? Starting off the year, right? So if anybody is actually interested and they're like, I want to take my team through this, I want to go through this myself, you can jump on there. We're creating a cohort just for adventure racers to take anybody who wants to go through this process. It's an 8-week process, 2 hours per week. And we'll go through the whole entire thing, and it will be hyper focused on adventure racing. How does this actually affect adventure racing? And obviously that's going to get into your personal life too. Like, how does this affect you when you're at home and when you're, when you're working?
Well, there's going to be a spillover effect.
But you're right. It takes this 8 weeks for people to even really begin to neurally recondition to say, okay, this is what's actually going on. But once we do that, a lot of times what we get back is we have these incredible stories, and they become so commonplace now, where people are like, I left my old job and I started a brand new career. I left a toxic relationship and I have, the love of my life now. I now know exactly what I want to major in. And so I'm going to go ahead and go major in that thing. Like, there's so many different ways, and it affects everybody at any level. Like, if you're in your 20s trying to figure out what to do with your life, or now you've got kids that are out of the house and you're like, I'm retiring, but I don't know what to do with the rest of my time, and anywhere else in between. This gives you that direction that you need, but also that energy to do that. But you're right, this is neurological reconditioning. So a lot of it is us over 8 weeks. We give you the entire framework, and then you'll start to notice immediately results. Like the minute you identify that fear that week, that's one of the most exciting weeks, because you're like, oh my gosh, I never saw it before, but now I see it everywhere. I can see how this thing has plagued me inside of my life. But then with this, what we want to do is we've created a session just for adventure racers, where you can sit down and we're going to extrapolate that to say, okay, if let's just say that you have a team of 3 people, right? Just to kind of make the math easy, right? And you're like, okay, well, let's go ahead and let's extract these 3 people's fear that's on your team, right? So let's just say like one person's like, their fear is like a dishonest person or like a manipulative person. You have someone who's like an escapist or an anxious person, and maybe someone who's like, I don't know, like a narcissist or something like that. When you inverse that, you can say, okay, well, what are your strengths? What is that your brain wants to do and become more than anything else? And you can end up with something like, honesty could be one person's thing, and then courage would be someone else's thing, and then compassion would be the other person's thing. And even though these are like human virtues that are valuable everywhere, to that person, right? To the person who is like, honesty is their thing, they're like, courage is definitely valuable, but honesty is my thing. So when you start looking at developing your team and saying, okay, how do we work out together? How do we work together? You can actually start assigning tasks based off of your purpose. So like the honesty person, right? You probably want to put them in charge of something like, assessing a situation, or the courageous person. He's going to be like the one that's empowering the team, or the compassionate person. Maybe that person's the medic, right? And they're the one just double checking, is everybody doing okay? Sure. So instead of just looking at skills, you can actually look at what the core motivation is of the individual and start assigning tasks to that.
That's one thing that high functioning teams do, right? High functioning teams spend their time recognizing the team members' internal traits and then layering those traits into the team dynamic, right? So you mentioned the idea like of the compassionate person. Very often there's somebody on the team whose job it is to keep an eye on everybody else. Are you eating? Are you drinking? Is your pack too heavy? How are your feet? And so to your point, as you talk about the process that you do with teams, and it really feels like team coaching, right? The idea that you are able to spend some time with teams, really digging into their internal dynamics and how those internal dynamics drive their external behavior and how those behaviors come together in the team setting.
Oh, it's so cool too. Because when you sit down with a team that's been together, I mean, this happens a lot when I do it with like married couples, because they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is the argument we have all the time. And now we finally know what it is, right? Being able to identify it and actually write it out on a piece of paper, having a name for it, right? Being able to identify that fear. On the one side, that gives you better mechanisms to say, okay, this is your thing and this is my thing. Right. So when we're out there and it's 2:00 in the morning and we are all super sleep deprived and we're hungry and we're thirsty and freezing cold, I know that you're going to default to this, and you know that I'm going to default to that. So right now, when we're in our air-conditioned room and everything is fine, how should we strategize for that situation, knowing that's your default, knowing that's not mine? And then flipping that to say, and then when we need to move something forward, I know this is your strength and you know this is my strength, and we're not going to get, jealous of each other or be like, yeah, that's mine and that's yours, right? Because you know those lanes. Yeah. How can we best use that? So for a lot of people that I work with, especially people who have become extremely successful, once we uncover what their fear is and their purposes, it's something that they've never seen before. But then the minute we uncover it, they're like, yes, this is it. Right. I've never had words for it, but this is why I've become so successful, or this is why I have failed, right? And I just never had words for it. But now that I have words for it, now it can become a strategy.
Right. Okay. So I see where you're going there, that from the individual perspective, having a greater sense of yourself, your own understanding is obviously beneficial, right? The more we know about ourselves, the things that drive us are very good. To your point, you're really manifesting a really strong recommendation we see in adventure racing. And back in episodes, we had two researchers on from Johns Hopkins, and the work that they did. One thing that they discovered was that highly functioning teams in the stress of the moment, they spend time prior to the stressful moment before the race having conversations about what to expect when the race begins. And so one thing that you do when you work with teams, and you do those team dynamics and you walk people through the process, is that you're basically putting that on steroids. Is that you're creating a setting in which when people find themselves in those really hard dynamics, they default to their individual personalities, and therefore the team can carry itself forward, as opposed to the dynamic that we've all seen from time to time venture racing, where teams just cannibalize themselves. Things just go wild because they try to solve complex problems on the fly during a race.
Yeah. And you see this when the more high stakes, the more fear has a way of taking hold. Like I had that great opportunity to work with the Air Force. And when you look at that, I mean, there's a lot of training for the Air Force. I mean, just right off the bat, to become a fighter pilot, they're going to put you through a fear test, their own kind of fear test. It's like a fight, flight, or freeze test. Mm-hmm. And the end result of that is if you fight or you flight, they'll take you. If you freeze, they won't. Because they're like, it's just going to take you too long to neurologically recondition.
They want a behavior. They don't want stillness.
Yeah, they're like, you just need to do something. We'll recondition you to do the right thing, but we just need to do something, right? But on top of that, like they have, they got like their foundational like military training, their technical skills training. They even have like resilience and stress training. They have all these different kinds of trainings. But the problem with this is, if you don't know what your fear is, you can actually end up learning how to manage out of fear. That's why you can end up with somebody who might be an incredible colonel or general or lieutenant, like someone who's amazing at that, and then just a really, really difficult person to live with. Somebody who has a hard time in their marriage, having a hard time raising children, having a hard time having friends. Because once you start weaponizing your own fear to manage other people or to manage a situation, it starts to just fall apart. The idea behind this is like, let's see where we weaponize our own fear and think that that's a positive. Let's shine a light on that. And for the adventure racers, especially, like you guys, I'll admit, like not even the military really gets to this point where you're burning so many calories, like bonking, right? Like there's not a lot of sports that even could get to that point. So when you start thinking about caloric intake, if you just knew that if I wasn't weaponizing my fear, that's going to be all those calories dedicated to self-regulation. How do I control myself in the situation? I can dedicate those calories toward my purpose, which is going to be something that intrinsically moves me forward, right? Like I want to be honest. I want to be courageous. I want to be compassionate. And my brain will reward me like heaven over earth. Like it will reward me when I do this thing. And when you do that and help everybody else do that, then you just produce so many better results.
Well, that's the idea that adventure racing, there's tremendous energy expenditure, right? If you're to a 5-day race, you're on the go. Maybe you're still over 5 days, 7 to 10 hours, maybe even less for some of the top teams. And if you're not moving, you're burning calories, right? If you are moving, you're burning calories. Yeah. And so to your point, if you are agitated, if you're angry, if you're in a different headspace, that takes energy to keep that emotion flowing. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that emotion, you're not spending energy in that direction. You have more energy to be spent on moving your body, making good decisions, keeping your head in the right place.
The chronic stress of weaponizing your fear is so high. It just doesn't make sense, especially if you're going to go inside of something like, a race where you just know every single ounce of what I'm taking in has to go in the right direction. Right. It shouldn't be going backwards or sideways. But I think more than anything else, it's like, this is what I love about adventure racing, adventure racers, which I'm sure you must have been asked this question. People have to ask you, like, why do you do this stuff? Right? Like, why do you, this is so hard. Navy SEALs give up doing some of these things, right? And when you look at that, you just know that fundamental to this sport, and this is what I love about this, right? Fear produces, at best, achievement. But your life's purpose, the inverse of your fear, like the best part of you, that produces the idea of becoming. And when you have a sport this intense, you can't help but ask yourself, am I doing this just to achieve something? Because if you do, you'll get the gold medal and then you'll ask yourself, do I just need to do it again to get that other high? Or like, why am I doing this? But you know that when you suffer and when you go through this much stuff, right? There's a difference between chronic suffering and pain, right? Mm-hmm. This is good pain because it has purpose to it, right? When you go through this, you're becoming a type of person. Mm-hmm. And that's where it becomes exciting, because in this sport, your purpose can become something that puts everything on steroids, because your purpose says this is the type of person who you want to become. And when you put yourself in these types of stressful situations, it only accentuates who you truly want to be. And that's why I get so excited when I get the opportunity to work with, world record holders or Olympic athletes, because making that switch from I don't have to like ruin my well-being to become successful, but rather I increase my well-being to become successful, right? Well-being becomes the fuel to success
self-care becomes the thing you have to have. So it's no longer about breaking yourself down to achieve, but rather leaning into the various parts of yourself to achieve.
Yes, that becomes the fuel, right? And then you finish the race, and whether you take first or last, you're like, this is what I want to do. This is who I want to be, and your brain will reward you, and you'll have better health. Like you'll actually feel and be a better person in the end. So to me, this is no better place to really look at that experiment and say, how can I be the type of person who I truly want to become, as opposed to maybe if I achieve this, then people will like me. Right. Then I'll be accepted.
It's interesting. So I feel obligated to answer your question. Like, why do people do this sport? Like, what happens? And what I've kind of settled upon as I've thought about it and pondered it and discussed it with others and discussed it inside the sport, outside the sport, is I found for the long-term adventure racer, the reason why they stay an adventure racer is not why they started adventure racing. Mm-hmm. That for a lot of people, they dip their toes into the adventure racing waters because they've gone through, and this is not for everybody, but I think this is more often than not, on my experience, they've gone through the whole slate of endurance sports along the way. They enjoy physical movement. They enjoy racing. They enjoy competition. They enjoy the strength and the feeling and the endorphins. They enjoy all of that. And they slowly begin to check off various boxes along the way, right? So you run a 5K, you run a 10K, you run a marathon, you run an ultra. You race bicycles, you race different kinds of bikes, you take bike trips, and people have kind of run their way through endurance sports. Then you end up in adventure racing, and adventure racing becomes the next thing that they want to try. And there are folks who try adventure racing. They might do it 12, 24, 18, 36-hour adventure race and call it a day. They're good. And there are those that do it continuously over time. And I think those that do it continuously over time, and I think I qualify in this category because I've done it over a decade and I've done multiple races in different lengths and different places. I think it's like anything else. It's a combination of factors. I think that you find, first things first, I have found some of the best people I know are adventure racers, right? They're selfless. They work with others. They like solving problems. They take care of each other. They enjoy the team dynamic. They enjoy the challenge, and they enjoy the shared experience of doing it together. I've mentioned on the podcast before, Chris Kalous has a show called The Enormocast. It's about climbing. And he says that when you go on a big climbing trip and you survive the mountains let you live. It's like war. It's like war stories without the war, that there's that shared common experience. So I think that the level of community is is huge about that. What I will tell you is that from many adventurers that I know who do these massive things, that it is far less about the ability, the social cachet of saying you're an adventure racer, because you lose the social cachet because it feels so different from what normal people find to be enjoyable, that it's not like, oh, he's an adventure racer, she's an adventure racer, that's so cool. It's like, this person's a crackpot. Like, why are they doing this for? And so you have to find that joy inside the sport itself, right? And I think that's why people stay with the sport over time, is that there's this community, the sense of accomplishment, and also too, to tell you the truth, Slade, it's plain old fashioned fun. It's fun to be with your friends. I mean, we're kind of like 12-year-olds, right? We're friends with maps in the woods, and there's no phones, and there's no parents, and there's no work responsibilities. It's you and your mates and the map and the course, and you are a self-contained unit for however long you're racing. Yeah. It's a great way to lean into the kind of person you want to be. So it's a longer answer to a complex question, but I do think in what you're talking about today, I do think that adventure racers will only benefit from greater consideration of who they are and understanding their internal motivators. I think that goes without being said, because knowing more about yourself and using it in the right direction will help you as a person and as a racer and as a whatever, right? Add whatever you are on top of that.
No, this is great. This is great because, I mean, a lot of times when I work with people who excel, people who succeed at really big things, right? There's going to be that dynamic of like, well, this is kind of a flow state for me. I like doing this particular kind of a thing, right?
It's a great way to describe it, by the way. Not to cut you off, but the idea, I'm glad you said flow state, and I can't even pronounce the researcher's name. It's like a 18.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Say that again.
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi.
Exactly, that guy. He coined flow state, which we've talked a lot about. Go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Inside of this program, we actually we dive deep into flow and creating purposeful flow, and how do we do that as we do that. But that's like one dynamic you'll see with people who succeed is like they have this flow state that they really enjoy. That's why they become optimal performers, because that's the science of optimal performance, right? And they may even have like a conscious reason why, like, I always wanted to do this because of this one reason, because of that one reason. What we really want to get into is, are you on the course because of your fear? Like, did you grow up thinking that you weren't good enough and that's why you're here? Because you can produce results with that, but that's going to end up not only sabotaging your own life, but everybody who you're with. And what we really want to do is flip that to say, what is the inverse of that? What is your best self? What is your life's purpose? Kind of an idea, right? And can we get you to perform because of that? Because of that, at that level, you're no longer performing to win necessarily. You are just being your best self. And when it comes down to the metrics, so when we go through this program, right, when we take people through the program, we take people through so much science. Oxford, Harvard, different, we have over 50 different universities that we quote, lots of different researchers and white papers. But we get down to, why is it that you produce better results consistently when you're led by your purpose than when you're led by your fear? And you guys, I love what it is that you do, because your margin of error is so thin. It's life and death. That becomes really, really, really important.
To your point there, it gets intense, right? And but keep in mind, all sports are risky, all things are risky, right? And so I don't want people to think that adventure racing is like we're up there like Honnold up on free wall, we're going to plummet to our deaths. There's risk involved in everything, right? If you don't want risk, you never get in a bathtub and you never walk down a flight of stairs. So so that being said, I do think that there's, to your point, when you find yourself in the wilderness and you find yourself up high and you're making these intense decisions where it's a high consequence choices and behaviors, being your very best self inside that setting is essential for not only team success and personal satisfaction, but for overall safety. Yeah. Right? You don't want to bring someone into the mountains who's not going to be able to be a good teammate and make bad decisions when things are getting really, really hard. And I've seen that. I've seen people high up for a combination of fatigue, exhaustion, hunger, whatever you want to call it, make some crazy decisions that if the ball bounced differently, not everybody's coming home. And to your point, knowing yourself better makes you more safe as well as a better teammate and everything else.
Yeah, and incredible. So, I mean, that's just, I would love more than anything else. I mean, I would just love to sit down with a good group, jump to sladecombs.com and scroll down. You'll see adventure racers. We have an elite adventure racer cohort just for you all. You can jump inside of there. It's 8 weeks, 2 hours. And if you can't even make we're recording and Zooming everything too, so you can watch it, and this actually, the program itself is super fun. It's like watching Netflix. We actually went all the way around the country and shot an entire program. So it's like watching TV as you get to, go through the whole entire thing. This is not like a normal, just sit down and listen to some random person talk, right? It's not me just talking to you the whole time. It's you're going to be watching, and we're going to go from the Redwood Forest to New York City and everywhere else in between, talking about principles and strategies. And in the end, applying everything to adventure racing, because you're right. If we can not only keep ourselves, safe as we go out there and do these races and to help each other have a better time, but become more of who we truly want to become, that in essence, I think is going to be a great, great race.
Well, there you have it, folks. Episode 148 of the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. Thanks again for being a listener. Thanks to Slade for coming on. Cool interview. Interesting guy. Be sure to check out the links in the show notes and chase down what he's talking about. You do go in that direction. We'd love to hear your feedback about working with Slade and what he did for you and for your team. And always interested to find outside folks that are willing to dip into the adventure racing world. So let us know how it goes. And as always, keep listening. Thanks for being here. And if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.